The Niger Delta has some of the biggest oil fields in the world. It's a dangerous place of guns and poverty, where people need development, and the environment is heavily polluted from 50 years of living with the oil industry. In June 2013, in the dead of night, a massive explosion occurred on a major Shell pipeline near the village of Bodo, spilling thousands of barrels of oil into the swamps. It was the 25th attack on that pipeline in the last 2 years, but the size of the Bodo explosion and its proximity to the very people who were supposed to have been guarding it made it remarkable, exposing the depths of corruption at the heart of the Nigerian oil industry. We went to the swamps in Bodo to see where the accident took place. Just a few hundred yards over there is the Joint Task Force. That's the military's station. It's impossible to know exactly what was going on, but the likelihood is that oil was being stolen in a very, very large way, right under the noses of the authorities, and perhaps with the collusion of the authorities. In the days following the explosion, a team was assembled to investigate what happened. Catholic priest Father Obi was invited to join this official investigation.
From the very moment I got to the area, I was suspicious, because I wondered why a site that should have been well protected, the JTF were probably 70 meters from the scene, because I could see their houseboat from the scene of the fire.
The military were within 70 meters?
They were at most maybe 100 meters, but I don't think it was up to 100 meters.
So clearly the military knew what was
They
going on.
knew exactly what was going on there. And then also, later on in the investigation, it was clear to me that Shell was aware that this was probably one of the most bunkered points on the
When you say bunkered,
Trans-Niger.
that is where the oil was being tapped off?
Was being tapped off because there is always oil there. And from the investigation, it was clear to us that Shell knew this.
What you're saying is that the company knew,
yes,
the contractors knew,
they knew quite
the
well
military knew,
yeah.
Everybody
knew and
that this oil was being taken out.
And for me, there was clear complicity from everybody around.
But everyone has a different story to tell. Shell, which says it's losing 40 to 60,000 barrels of oil a day to theft, has stated that oil was being stolen in Bodo, but they told us emphatically that their own contractors were not involved. Nigeria says it's losing 400,000 barrels of oil a day to sabotage, theft and lost production. That's nearly 20% of everything that's produced in the Delta. And it's costing the government and oil companies $20 billion a year. No other country in the world is losing anything like this much. For 20 minutes now we've been flying over a devastated landscape with dozens of illegal refineries, some small scale, some quite large scale, which have been tapping oil off the main pipelines, putting the oil into barges and exporting it who knows where. The landscape has been destroyed. It's a very tragic situation. If you want to understand the problems of the people in the Delta, then come to Bodo. There are no wells there, but still the community is plagued by oil. In 2008, faults in the Shell pipeline spilt tens of thousands of barrels of crude into the mangrove swamps, causing total devastation. 5 years later, and people here are still waiting compensation and cleanup. They've lost their fishing grounds and much of their farmland. Oil has been nothing short of a disaster for these people. This, underneath me, is the Trans-Niger pipeline, the great 24-inch artery of oil which leads from the oil fields here out to the terminal at Bonny down the road. It's not protected. You can see, look, it's right under my feet. If I jumped hard enough on it, I'd probably break it myself. This pipeline provides nothing for these communities. They get nothing. They get none of the oil from it. They get none of the money from it. Shell runs this pipeline. Shell is now saying that it needs to make a new pipeline. It's going to spend £1,500 million on a new pipeline to avoid communities like this and sabotage. If it spent a tenth of that money on the communities, you could argue you wouldn't have these problems in the first place. Oil and people here do not seem to mix. Not only have the people of the Delta had to live with the disastrous effects of oil, they are routinely blamed for most of the spillages and theft. Community leaders in Bodo insist this simply isn't possible. We saw the pipeline going through Bodo.
Yes.
And it's not protected.
It's not protected.
It's anyone could break into it. If I had a chisel and I broke into it, what would happen?
It's not easy to use chisel.
Chisel cannot do.
Chisel they cannot do.
I could bore it. I could.
You use some engine to bore engine.
Yeah.
It's not possible.
It's not something that you can use. You cannot easily do it manually.
Yeah.
It must be done by an engine.
Yeah.
When you pass through the community, you will see it's not easy for a poor man like us to go and make a badge that will cost you
Some
millions of naira to construct one.
So is the oil being stolen by the rich? The fact is, it takes serious money to set up even a moderate operation for the removal and refining of crude from the pipelines. There are just a handful of legal refineries in the Delta, and they're not working at full capacity. That means there's a gaping hole in the fuel market that can be filled by anyone with the financial clout. The same day we met this major oil trader, he told us he'd been offered 50,000 litres of stolen oil. The big oil companies are blaming the poor. Is this honest or dishonest?
It's very dishonest.
Why?
It's very dishonest because what is required to engage in this large scale stealing that we see. The claims by the big oil companies are not small. They are not small killings. Like, we're talking about millions of barrels of crude oil. How does the poor man engage in stealing these things? Because he doesn't have the means. He cannot do it.
So what kind of resources, what kind of financial resources do you need to get yourself involved in this thieving of oil?
You need what's called a purpose. It's a very big wooden boat. You can't build that boat for less than 2.5 million naira. You need that boat. You need to settle the military. The settlement of the military is not in hundreds of thousands, it's in millions of naira. So at that level, you'd say 5 million. You can acquire products. You can acquire crude oil to move to your refining base. But it doesn't stop there, because for you to be able to move, for you to get involved in moving product to your refinery, that means you have an existing refinery already.
Yeah.
And it costs some money to have an existing refinery.
The size and scale of the illegal refineries varies, but collectively they do massive environmental damage. They're open secrets that scar the landscape. Mela Oforibika, a lawyer and chief from the town of Bolo, took us to see a recently destroyed illegal refinery just a mile from shore. It was only a medium-sized operation, but it was capable of processing up to 10,000 litres a day, much of which was spilt into the creeks. Aye. It stinks, it absolutely stinks of oil. This was just one refinery. And it's an area, 2-3 acres, I should think, at least.
Yes.
And it's completely devastated.
Totally.
The ground is just saturated completely.
you can see it.
So, this is a big operation
Yes,
there. This
big
has
operation.
got lots of money behind it.
Yes.
And
you had about 20, 30 persons every minute working.
30 people living here, working here full time.
Here full time.
This was done under the very nose of the military. Was it, in your estimation, was it done with the connivance, with the complicity of the...
Of course, there was a high level of complicity. You can't rule out the level of corruption that is there. You can't rule it out.
But is your belief that these refineries started because companies like Shell never did the cleanups, never did or kept their promises,
Yes,
never...
yes, they had spillages from equipment failure.
Yeah.
They always denied them and
Yeah.
they charge them as sabotage.
Yeah.
And later people say, okay, everything you're saying is sabotage. Why don't we start sabotaging them at once? You know?
So if Shell had been a good company, if the other oil companies had acted properly,
Yes.
you would never have this criminality.
You would not have had this scale. And you would not have had the level of connivance that also went with it. Because, let me put it, silence. It's just spoiled the environment. It used to be a pristine area. You know, you see the mangroves, see the trees, everything.
Illegal refineries in the Delta operate only with the permission of the military and police, and they demand payment. Every so often they're closed down in a show of military power, but most relocate and start again. This small-time trader dealt in just a few barrels a day. He claims that what little he earned from the trade was far outstripped by the money that the police would demand in bribes. When the business was working, how much did you have to pay the authorities, in other words the police or the JTF? How much did you have to pay them to keep quiet?
Whenever they come, for instance, if they ask for 5 drum, 10,000, we price the rate of 5,000. But at times, they don't collect anything. They destroy all.
But the police are part of the business in the sense that you have to give them money to be able to carry on your work.
The police, just same as the JTF, when they come, the little I have, I give to them. For me, the military involvement is been the biggest, I think the military are the biggest players in this. Because none of these things can be done without the military. The Niger Delta, for example, for at least has been militarized in a very large way. So there's nothing you can do without seeking their consent. Their consent means they are involved in the business.
What's clear is the oil industry in Nigeria has developed a culture of secrecy and complicity that allows the wealthy and powerful to prosper, but only offers crumbs to the poor. Almost nowhere in the Delta is completely untouched by oil, but just a few miles down the road from Bolo and Bodo is the town of Kar, where there are no pipelines, and despite the occasional slick coming from upstream, life continues much as it always has. This is great. This is the Nigeria we don't see enough of in the media. We read about the oil pollution, we read about the terrorism, we read about the corruption. This is just an ordinary small town in Nigeria going about its business, and it's humming, it's thriving, it's lovely, it's music, it's kids, it's calm, it's just everything we don't expect from Nigeria. This is how the place was, and this is why it's really worth fighting for. It's a palm gin. Cheers, it's really good. Down the house. We may never know who was responsible for the explosion in Bodo, because the authorities themselves may be implicated. Oil theft seems practically out of control. Ken Saro-Wiwa Jr. is an aide to the president. He knows only too well how the oil industry has failed the people of the Delta. So who is responsible?
Well, it's a complex network. You can look at the allegations are including commodity traders. We're looking at people who are lifting oil. We're looking at insurance, people who own ships. We're looking at security agencies. We're looking at militant networks. So it goes right across. The value chain is long and complicated.
Are the oil companies implicated?
Well, there's some suggestions, but again, these are things which require proper investigation, and certainly it's not. In the end, it's not so much about pointing fingers, but it's looking for solutions.
Whatever the solution, poverty must be addressed. Community leaders across the Delta want licenses to set up small-scale legal refineries that would provide diesel for local consumption. This, they say, would create jobs, stop much of the pollution and generate real development.
One, let them get modular refineries on board. 5,000 liters.
You're arguing for
10,000 liters.
what each
Yes,
community should have its
yes,
own
yes.
legal refinery.
Yes, legal refineries
In every
at the
major
small
community.
stages.
Yeah.
And then the sale of the crude at domestic price, not at international spot price.
And that would stop the criminality.
It will stop the criminality. Because, of course, where are you stealing it to sell to? Who are you refining it to? When there is legal refinery here, catering for 10,000 liters, who's going to buy that one that you went into the bush to do? Nobody. Because they are sure that it's of a better quality, they are sure that it's well regulated in line with environmental practices. Nobody's going to buy yours that you made
So it
in
would
the
end
bush.
the pollution, it would end the criminality, and it would bring
It
prosperity.
will end everything and it will bring prosperity.
But some reject oil completely. Nemo Bassi, chair of Oil Watch International, believes that oil in Nigeria has been a disaster for his country.
Oil has been the major factor that has dislocated everything in Nigeria, about Nigerian politics, Nigerian economy, the infrastructure. Before oil, Nigeria was a rich country. Since oil began to be a major income earner, Nigeria has become an impoverished country. Oil should be left in the soil. Coal should be left in the hole. Tar sands should be left in the sand, and there should be no fracking at all. The oil-based civilization has gone on for about 200 years. It's not going to take us to eternity. It's time now for us all around the whole world, rich or poor, to move from this fossil fuel-driven production and consumption system and go the way of renewables.
So this is what oil does in its crudest form to the environment. It destroys it. There's nothing left. And it's going to go on, that's the whole point. It's going to go on until somebody says that's enough. That's enough exploitation of the resource, that's enough exploitation of people, that's enough thieving of resources, that's enough destroying of the environment. This sort of culture of rape and destroy will just inevitably go on in every oil field of the world. It's happening. It's happening in Ecuador, it's happening in Colombia, it's happening all over Africa, it's happening in the East, and war and political strife comes with oil. The oil culture is just a disaster. It's a curse. It is not a blessing. At this level, it is a curse.